Hi, I am Manvitiku. You are watching the module on research ethics for research methodology in the course Law. So, what is research ethics really? Well, to begin with, let us understand what do you mean by research. A researcher, actually speaking, lives in every human being. The thing that differentiates a researcher from another human being is the fact that a researcher is able to see some or the other problem in the societal dynamics that he is surrounded with. Problem as in a research problem. Well, societal dynamics always give rise to some or the other social problem because of conflict of interest, which we as law students are all aware of. These societal problems are looked at or observed by different researchers or by different people in different ways, and this kind of observation or the different observations give rise to different set of research problems in the minds of different researchers. Let's take for example the problem of increasing number of rapes in India may give rise to an idea in a researcher's mind that some research is due in the punitive section of our criminal law. So he wants to study punishment, and to another researcher the same problem of rapes may give rise to an idea that some research is due in the patriarchal side of the feminist studies. So he wants to study feminist studies and he wants to study patriarchy in that. Now, what does this tell us? This tells us that the social problems may be same, they may be common because they are coming out from the societal dynamics, but the way that these social problems are observed and the way that these social problems are perceived by different people gives rise to different ideas, different set of ideas in different people. What does this tell us? This tells us that it is not just a social problem that is important for research, but also the innovation and imagination of every person comes into play when we are talking about legal research. So a research problem is formulated in a researcher's mind. He takes up a research, he is able to get some sponsorship for his research, and what does that yield for him is a research report. So the research that he conducts or the research idea that was actually conceived by him in the first place are all tangible things that cannot be seen or touched, but the research report is something that he is able to produce and we can see it, we can read it, and therefore we can understand in what way did that particular researcher perceive a particular social problem. Now, why do we need research ethics? Well, ethics and morality are some things which govern each and every aspect of our life. We do not walk out of the doors of our house without ethics. Well, even within the four walls of our house, we always follow ethics and morality. These are the basic rules that one has to follow being a human being, because we are not animals, we are higher intellectual animals. Now, why do we need ethics in research? Research is something that is to be conducted by every individual differently. He has his own set of notions, he has his own set of ideals. So why do we need ethics really? Well, that is the catch. The problem is that even though a research problem may be formulated by different people due to their own imagination and due to their own innovation, yet the end result, that is the research report, which is the most important thing, may become a common factor. A research report which has been produced by one person may be used by another person saying that it is my research report. So now what that other person is doing, he is trying to get away with someone else's work saying that it is his own work. That is unethical. He may add some points here and there and just produce a very laminated version of that older research and say that it is my own research. That is not only wrong for the earlier research and the earlier researcher, but also it puts in a bad light the whole fraternity of researchers. So why do we need research ethics really? Number one, to have a common set of standards. What do you mean by common set of standards? Well, the set of standards that would be followed by everyone equally. There won't be any discrepancy, there won't be any ambiguity or vagueness. So, one researcher cannot say that I am not aware or I am not in the knowledge of what kind of research ethics are there. Having a common set or a common standard of ethics basically does away with this kind of ambiguity. The second thing is, it rules out all kinds of uncertainty. It is for the benefit and the knowledge of all the people who are coming ahead for research. Third thing is, it is a universal thing. Research ethics becomes a universal common factor for everyone who is coming ahead to do research. Plus, they will have prior knowledge. So, before a researcher embarks upon a research, any research, he knows what he is getting into, because he knows he will have to do an ethical research, and he will also know what does doing an ethical research mean. So, there should be a common set of standards. Another important factor that makes a research ethics very important is that following ethics in research or giving or conducting a ethical research basically makes the research socially acceptable. Now, why do we need social acceptance if the researcher is doing the research for himself? Well, no, the researcher is doing the research for the society. The society is what be the knowledge bank for the researcher, and it is the researcher's responsibility to give back to the society what he is gaining from the society. So, to gain a social acceptance, the researcher needs to do an ethical research. Not only that, before embarking upon the research, he needs certain sanctions from certain organization, etc., or he needs certain permissions from those people from whom he wants to collect his data, etc. For all these things and for having an acceptable research, the researcher must do an ethical research which will be acceptable to him, to the future researchers who want to research in the same field, as well as to all the actors and the participants who are a part of the research. Next important factor of having standard research ethics is that it maintains a minimal standard of good quality research. Research work in any country, in any field, is a very important component for the development of not only the society but also the knowledge in that particular field. Therefore, having research ethics or following research ethics or conducting a research in an ethical manner is what will ensure that minimal standards of good quality research are adhered to. Most importantly, doing an ethical research sets a good precedent. However, let us take an example of a person who may not be doing an ethical research, or who has produced a research report with a lot of plagiarized material. Well, what he is simply doing is he is setting a wrong precedent for those researchers whom he might be guiding tomorrow when he becomes a guiding supervisor, or else his plagiarized material might be used as an inspiration by some other future genuine researcher. So basically, unethical research is a chain that cannot be stopped. It is an unending vicious circle. For it to stop, it is the responsibility of the researcher himself to maintain a particular standard so that he is able to set a precedent for the research. Now, what do you mean by ethical research? Ethical research means following certain ethics in research. Do we know what these ethics are? No. Is there any law that gives these ethics? No. Then how do we know what these ethics are? If there is no law and there is no particular standard that everyone knows. Well, the fact is, just like in life, research ethics also need to come from the logic of the particular researcher, as well as from his own genuinity. It needs to emanate from his own genuinity and honesty. Sincerity in work is the first and foremost thing that a person can do to follow ethics in research. Would you Would we be getting any reward for doing an ethical research? Well, the answer is no. We do not get a reward for doing any research. Would we be getting punished if we do not do an ethical research? Again, unfortunately, the answer is no. We would not be getting punished. So then, question number 1, how will we ensure that research ethics are followed? And question number 2, why should we follow research ethics? The answer to these questions are, we need to follow research ethics for the sake of saving grace of the whole research fraternity. It sets a bad precedent to do an unethical research, and the blot of being an unethical research is something that will never leave the research report, even if the researcher, the unethical researcher himself wants to make amendments later on. Secondly, as far as the question of if there is no law or if there is no punishment, then how can we ensure that the ethics are followed? It goes like this. In life, we have many laws that are passed by the parliament. Well, do these laws, let's take for example criminal laws, do these criminal laws stop crime from happening? The answer is no. In the same way, having research ethics or having a certain policy for research ethics does not mean that research ethics will be followed. It only means that we have a certain standard to be followed when we are doing research. Now, what are these code of ethics, and are there any code of ethics that have been laid down? The truth is that every research institution might have their own code of ethics, might have their own policy and regulations with respect to it. And for that matter, every individual researcher also might be having his own set of ideals to be followed as in terms of doing an ethical research. But American Sociological Association in particular has come up with a set of code of ethics. What are these code of ethics? Let's have a look at them. First and foremost is professional competence. What is professional competence? Does it only mean competence in terms of degree? Like for example, in India, we talk about having a master's degree to be the minimal to conduct research. Is it sufficient? Does a master's degree ensure that a person is intellectually capable to conduct the research? The answer may be no, because even though educational institutions that have research as part of their curriculum have mandated that a course on research methodology has to be there, and have also mandated a compulsory research work, yet the things that a person carries or thing that a person learns during the education may not be carried forward to his professional time as well. So in terms of this, when a researcher proposes a particular research, it is not only the duty but also the obligation of the supervisor as well as the research institutes or the sponsoring institutes to ensure that the person is professionally competent to conduct the research. It is also desirable that the person himself understands it, that what does it mean to be professionally competent to conduct research, and is honest about it and does the research accordingly. Second thing that has been laid down by the American Sociological Association is integrity. Now, the research that is to be conducted has to be honest. The research problems that have been emanated by that have been created by the researcher should be genuine, and most importantly, the work that is being done or that is proposed to be done by the researcher should be sincere. He should be sincere towards his efforts for the research. The third thing that has been laid down is the professional and scientific responsibility. Now, the society as such is the thing that gave the researcher the research problem in the first place. The society is the one from where the researcher is going to collect his data and then analyze and interpret his results. So the society is the one to whom the researcher owes a lot. In fact, it is the researcher's responsibility to take care that whatever research he is conducting, in whichever field he is conducting a research, he should be able to professionally conduct the research and follow the technicalities of the research. For example, there are various tools that are available for data collection. There are various techniques for data analysis. There are various techniques done for sampling. There are various techniques at every step of the research, and it is the responsibility as well as it is ethically desirable that the researcher follows all these technicalities in all sincerity. This is the responsibility that the researcher holds not only towards the society but towards the research as such. The next thing is respect for people's rights, dignity and diversity. Well, the researcher is bound to collect certain data from the society. This collection of data from the society is not the researcher's right, it is his privilege, because he is requesting the people or he is requesting the society to respond to certain questions and queries that he might be having, so that he makes conclusions accordingly. Now, in all this, there might be some times when the researcher may gain access to certain confidential information of any person or any organization or institution or a community, etc. And there also might be a situation where that particular confidential information may be very critical or very useful for the research report. In such cases, it is ethically desirable that the researcher uses the information with the prior permission of the particular person whose confidential information is there. It is not only ethics that is there, but also social responsibility, and a person might not be even aware of his right to privacy, but it is again the responsibility and the obligation of the researcher to first and foremost take prior permission from the person concerned whose confidential information he might have gained access to, and then and only then use that particular information in the module. Next thing is social responsibility. As I have already mentioned and emphasized, that the researcher owes a responsibility to the society, not only because of his research but also because the society is what gave him the research problem. The researcher must at all times know that his research is going to pave way for further research in the same topic or in the same field, and also it is going to help to ameliorate certain problems in the society. After all, the researcher came up with the research problem because there were certain problems in the society because of societal dynamics. So, after understanding these code of ethics that have been laid down, let us understand what are the various checkpoints in research. These checkpoints in research, as we call them, are the places or are the points during the research when the researcher has to be very careful of following ethics. So, all these checkpoints have to be kept in mind all the time by the researcher, so that he does not digress from the path of ethical research. First and foremost is the authorization to research. Authorization to research has to be had from two main actors. One is the organization or the institution which is sponsoring the research. Second is the participants of the research. Now, a researcher may have approached any organization or institution to conduct the research. He may also have approached a particular institution for sponsoring the research. In both the cases, he has to make sure that he has achieved or he has obtained the requisite authorization to conduct this particular research. Even in cases where the research may be publicly little explosive, as in the content of the research or the content that is proposed to be researched may be little complicated or conflicting, care has to be taken on part of the institution that the research has to be given authorization and a green signal, and then and only then the researcher can go ahead with the researcher. Secondly, the researcher has to obtain authorization from the participants in the research. Now, participants may be individuals, they may be families, they may be organizations or institutions. In all these cases, the researcher has to make sure that he has obtained the requisite permission to be a part of their lives and observe them or collect data from them, etc. It is especially very important in cases of participatory observation, in which the researcher is actually living with the people whom he wants to study. So he may not be asking any questions to them, but he will be observing and taking down some notes according to what he is observing. So he might be interfering with their lives, and he has to make sure that he tells those people and gives them prior information as to how much interruption will they be having in their lives. So all this is very important to gain authorization to research. Another very important aspect of authorization is that every institution or any organization to whom you may be approaching for research may have their own principles for conducting research. For example, lots of ministries in the government of India may have their own set of guidelines for every researcher who may come to them for any questions. So you have to make sure, or the researcher has to make sure, that he has complied with all these guidelines, and he has to make sure that he gets the requisite pre-authorization to conduct the research before he starts the research. Second thing is that he has to follow appropriate techniques and processes. Well, this is a very technical point and it does not sound very ethical, but the truth is that ethics does fall out. The ethics does come out from the technical things of a research process itself. So if a researcher is not able to follow the techniques that he has read during his education time, etc., he may not do it correctly, or he may be doing he may be applying a process correctly, but he may be applying it in a wrong place. So it is not shameful to go back to the books again and again for checking and referencing and seeing whether what you are doing or what you are conducting, the process that you have taken up, is correct or not. But it is very shameful if you are doing a research or if you are applying a particular process without actually knowing what you are doing. Next thing is confidentiality. So as we have already seen that respect for confidentiality of the people from whom the researcher may be collecting data is very important, and it is not only an ethical duty but an obligation of the researcher towards the society. So researcher has to make sure to tell the people from whom he is collecting data, and he has to ensure them that he will not be using any confidential information to which he may gain access without their permission. Next is research responsibility. This research responsibility is not only towards the society but the research field in itself. The researcher has to make sure that whatever research he does, he is putting it into the knowledge bank of the existing field. So his research is not only going to affect the social dynamics in that particular field, but also will steer and affect the future research in that particular field. Next is respect for people's rights, dignity and diversity. Well, the researcher has to know that whatever social problems he is looking at may be influenced by or may be affected by lot of people. Now society is composed of diverse people. There are a large number of people having conflicting interests. The researcher has to make sure that during the ongoing process of research, as well as after he has come up with his results, he is not producing any more conflict in the existing conflict of interest. In other words, he has to make sure that he retains and maintains the balance between the conflict of interests. He has to make sure that he respects the diversity of all the people present in the society to whom he has approached for the research or on whom the research has any kind of effect. Well, the most important thing that the researcher has to ensure is that he does not plagiarize anything in the research. What is plagiarism? Plagiarism is the act of taking up anyone else's work and presenting it or showing it as your own. Well, as serious as that sounds, it is a fact that plagiarism is one of the most common problem that is plaguing the research world today. What are the causes of plagiarism? First and foremost, it is easy. It is very easy to pick up another person's work and show it as your own. You do not have to make any efforts and you can just have something to your credit. Second thing is laziness. Sometimes researchers are very lazy to make the requisite efforts to produce an original work. Next problem is disinterest. sometimes a researcher is not interested in the field that he has chosen for research. That researcher has to make sure that whatever field he has chosen for research is of his interest. If it is of his if it is not of his interest, or if it has been imposed upon him by the supervisor or an institution, etc., he may not put in the requisite amount of efforts, or he may do a half-hearted job. In such scenarios, the easiest way of doing work is to plagiarize someone else's work. The next problem is some other professional commitments. Well, the researcher also may have some other professional commitments like teaching or some other research works, etc., or he may be employed in some other place. In such scenarios, the research gets affected because again the researcher wants to have an easy way out, and for the same he can use someone else's work and show it as his own. Another problem is, another cause of plagiarism is that it saves time. So very often amateur researchers or student researchers or unguided freelance researchers just do a research and they try to plagiarize someone else's work because it is going to save their time, and within lesser time they are going to have a research report in their name. Whether that research report is original or not, or whether that research report is going to be of any use to them or the society or not, is none of their concerns. They are only concerned with having a credit to a particular research report. Another problem that researchers often face is the pressure of competition. Well, in today's age where the research field itself is growing into a very varied field with lots of opportunities and scope, it is very difficult for a researcher to concentrate and do a particular research without having much money in the hands and doing the research ethically. For this purpose, what the researcher does is he takes 5 researches or 5 research works in hand, and he can plagiarize material from one research work to another research work. This saves his time, and as I said, he gets more than one research report to his credit. But that is not an ethical thing to do, and that again it increases the instances of plagiarism. Last and most important reason for plagiarism to happen is that there are hardly any checks. In a country like India, where technology is increasingly being used by researchers, even amateur and student researchers, to make their research easy, plagiarism has also become easy. And because plagiarism has become easy, it was a natural consequence that somehow the other check or balance should have been institutionalized, but that has not happened. Let us look further whether some institutional checks have been conducted or not till date. But before that, let us look at what are the types of plagiarism. First and foremost, and the most commonest kind, is the direct plagiarism. Direct plagiarism means where a person copies a whole chunk of someone else's work and shows it as his own. So a work may be an idea, or a work may be the complete consequence of an idea, that is a research report or an article, etc. So where a person uses someone else's literary work, whether it is in a book or in an article or in a research report, etc., where that particular material written by someone else or authored by someone else is used and produced as your own, it is called as direct plagiarism. Another form of plagiarism is indirect plagiarism, wherein the idea of another person is copied. Now one would think that two people can think the same thing. That is true. However, the way of presenting an idea and the way of communicating that idea, or the way of converting the idea into a particular literary work differs. However, sometimes it has been seen that a researcher may very cleverly change some words here and there, change some certain patterns here and there, and produce the idea or a particular research report of someone else in his own name, saying that it was my idea. That kind of plagiarism is called as indirect plagiarism. Third and very common kind of plagiarism is patch writing. Patch writing is where a researcher, or let's say an unethical researcher or a plagiarizer, uses a whole chunk of anyone else's literary work and puts it in his own research work. It may be intentional or it may be unintentional. that is all up to the researcher. But in direct plagiarism, the researcher may have used little pieces of information here and there, or little pieces of sentences, etc., here and there from other person's research work. In patch writing, a whole paragraph or a whole page, etc., is completely picked up from the original place and put in the plagiarized material, that is the research work of the unethical researcher. Another type of plagiarism that happens, and it is very rampant, is unintended plagiarism. Unintended plagiarism, as the name suggests, is not the intention of the plagiarizer. In that case, the plagiarizer or the unethical researcher may have forgotten to cite the reference or cite the place from which he may have taken a particular information or taken a particular literary work. In this case, the researcher may not have intended, but his carelessness is what causes the plagiarism. So that is also not forgivable, because where we are talking about professionalism, research is a professionalism. So in cases of professionalism, such kind of carelessness is not neither desirable nor acceptable. Next is self-plagiarism. Self-plagiarism means where a person publishes or uses his own published material in his own research work. So a person may have published something earlier, an article or a research work, etc., and in subsequent research work he uses his own previously published article. That is that may sound like it is not plagiarism, because after all that person is using his own intellectual product, but the fact is, because it has already been published, he has to either cite it or not use it completely. He can take an idea from it, he can get inspired from it, after all it is his own work, he cannot plagiarize the whole thing. So what is the thing that has caused plagiarism the most? The answer, unfortunately, is technology. Technology has been playing, it has been like a step brother to research, because on one hand it has helped to ameliorate the problems of researchers in a big way. Technology has helped research in a very major way, but on the other hand, technology has been shaking hands with plagiarism also. On the one hand, it has made plagiarism easy. On the other hand, it has given researchers the right or the access to a lot of open access content. There is a lot of easy web sharing which helps the researchers to share their content easily via emails or via whatever, in whatever way. The technology is helping the researchers to not only share their content but also access a lot of scholarly articles. For example, a lot of research work is available online today. It is a very common thing to not refer to books first, but to go to the internet and see what is available and see what is the primary explanation of a particular thing. In such a scenario, plagiarism has also been made easy, because a lot of scholarly articles, a lot of articles written by research scholars which may or may not be within the copyright time period are available online in an open access fashion. So this has made plagiarism very easy. Plagiarism being easy has become a very tough thing for the researchers to handle, especially those researchers who have been in the research field for a long time but are now supervising amateur researchers. So is there any protection against plagiarism, or is it all just hot air? The answer is yes. Even though plagiarism is an unethical way of doing research, yet it is a legal wrong when it comes to the Copyright Act of 1957. In India, this act protects all kinds of literary works. So a research report or an article or anything that is published in the way of literature is given protection under the Copyright Act. Under the Copyright Act, a person who is the original author of any piece of writing has the exclusive right to use that particular piece of writing, whether that is a research report or a thesis, a dissertation, or any small paper on an article even. He has the exclusive right to use that piece of writing for monetary benefits, or he also has the exclusive right to assign any license to a person to another person to use that particular thing. So in other words, this Copyright Act gives the exclusive right to this person to not only use his piece of writing for monetary benefits, but also he can exclude the other people, and if he does not want to exclude the other people, he can give them license to use it. So without their permission, if a person uses anyone's original piece of writing, he is liable to be punished under the Copyright Act. The remedies that are given under the Copyright Act are compensation to the person whose copyright has been infringed, injunction by the court, which the court says puts a stop on all the manufacture of publishing or all the publishing on the things that the plagiarizer might have done, and third thing, imprisonment and penalty. In all these ways, the Copyright Act protects against plagiarism. Well, this is all about plagiarism, but how do we uphold research ethics? All said and done, it is the self-discipline of the person himself by way of which he can uphold research ethics. As we have seen certain checkpoints during research which the researcher has to take care that he is not violating any research ethics at that particular point. It is after all the self-discipline of the researcher himself which can keep him on the track for an ethical research. Self-discipline is not only in terms of doing an ethical research when it comes to plagiarism, but also in terms of following all the technicalities of the research process, right from the time of the research problem formulation to the time of the last word when he is writing for the research report. Second thing is that there should be checks by the supervisor. So the supervisor or any institution under which the researcher may be doing his research, or any sponsoring institution also for that matter, should keep some kind of checks. These checks may be in the form of policy guidelines, or as these days some software companies are coming up with anti-plagiarism softwares. One example of such a software is Turnitin, which basically makes sure or ensures that the person who is submitting a research report or any piece of writing has not plagiarized from any open access content or any book that are within the copyright term. Next is institutional checks. Turnitin is one example of such checks, and it is also desirable that the institution lays down from the very beginning and takes an undertaking from the researcher that he or she will conduct the research in an ethical manner, following all the rules that have been laid down and following the code of ethics that is acceptable, that is an acceptable standard. Next thing is referencing, which is a very important and crucial thing, especially in legal research. Referencing means citing or giving the complete name of the source from which a particular piece of writing has been taken. So for example, a researcher while writing a research report may like to quote a particular author, if not a huge chunk of it, maybe 2 or 3 sentences from that author, and he feels that converting it into his own words may result in losing the essence of what the other author has said. In such a case, he may use the quote, he may quote that particular author, but he should ensure that he has referenced that author, he has cited that author in the prescribed manner. This prescribed manner is, there are various institutions which have come up with their own set of citation rules. Some popular ones are OSCOLA, MLA Handbook, the Harvard Style Blue Book, APA, etc. Last and but never the least is using the technology ethically. So technology may be a friend to plagiarism, but it is a greater friend to researcher, and it is only up to the researcher to use the technology in an ethical or an unethical way. At the end of the day, the researcher is himself his own master, and himself is his own student when it comes to using the technology as a research tool. So it has to be ensured by the researcher that he is not going aboard or he is not going overboard with using the technology for the sake of research. So summing up what we have learnt in this module, first and foremost we saw that research is not only a value addition to the society but also to the field of research. So research problems may be coming out from the society itself. Because of the social dynamics, there might be some social problems which a researcher observes and he is able to formulate a research problem out of them. Research is a value addition to the society in the sense because the researcher does the research, or he proposes to do the research with the thought that he will be able to help in ameliorating that particular problem from the society. So the researcher has to take care and he has to know that he is a responsible person for this research, not only for the society but also for the future research in the same field. Next thing is that ethical research sets a particular standard, it sets a precedent. So it is desirable that a researcher follows ethics in his research right from the step 1 to the last step of his research. It will not only make him feel good but will also set a good precedent for all the future researches and for all the researches that he might be supervising in the future. For this purpose, there might not be any law, but institutions can come up with their own policy guidelines. In fact, an association, as we have already seen, American Sociological Association has come up with certain points, with certain pointers that give the code of ethics. Next is how can ethical research be done? So one has to follow the code of ethics that we discussed. Second thing, one has to take care at certain points during the research. At those points during the research, when the researcher may digress to an unethical path, he has to make sure that he comes back and he does only an ethical research. He has to promise to himself, he has to commit to the research as well as to himself that this is a professional demand and a professional moral ethical obligation that he does an ethical research. Next, we learned about plagiarism. We learned how plagiarism is done and what are the causes, why has it become very rampant, and we learned the various kinds of plagiarism. We also saw that there are some plagiarism which may not look like plagiarism, like unintended or self-plagiarism, but in fact it is plagiarism, and it should the researcher should make all efforts to avoid it and prevent it. Technology has been a friend to plagiarism, as we have already seen. Plagiarism has been made mighty easy with technology. Like for example, in earlier times, it was very difficult to copy a whole book because there were no computers. So one had to type everything because there were no photocopy machines. During that time, plagiarism, even though it was conducted, but it required a lot of efforts. But today, plagiarism has become as easy as research itself. So it is in the desire, or it is in the interest of the ethical research that a researcher makes a commitment to himself that he will not use technology unethically, he will not use the technology for plagiarism, but he will use the technology as a friend to the researcher. We also learned certain protection that is given under the Copyright Act against plagiarism, and we learned some tips to uphold research ethics which vary from the institution as well as to the researcher himself.